Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we try to unpack some of the stuff that really matters and help you get smart fast.
Yeah.
Do you ever have those moments when a confusing idea just kind of clicks?
Oh, yeah.
Like suddenly it makes sense. So
Absolutely, yeah.
today we're going to be looking at a fresh take on how those aha moments happen, especially when we're grappling with things like math and science.
Yeah, and you know those STEM subjects can be really tough.
Yeah, for sure.
And so we're going to dive into a new way of thinking about this. It's called Radically Enactive Embodied Cognition, or REC for short.
REC, okay.
And it really challenges the way we typically think about learning. You know, traditionally we often think about it as happening primarily in our heads. We manipulate mental representations like pictures, and we kind of test out these hypotheses based on what we already know.
Right, so it's like our minds are these sort of self-contained think tanks running simulations
Yeah,
with
exactly.
this pre-existing software.
Yeah, like our brains are these little computers
Right, exactly.
working away in isolation.
Yeah. But REC is suggesting a totally different perspective.
Yeah, very different angle.
It suggests that learning is not just this internal process, that it's actually deeply connected to our physical bodies and how we interact with the world around us. And this is true even for something as abstract as algebra.
Exactly. I mean, that's the really mind-bending part of it. At first, it can feel counterintuitive. How could physically doing something be crucial to understanding something that seems purely intellectual?
Right, yeah. I mean, it's a pretty big shift.
It is a big shift. And so this deep dive is going to unpack that a little bit
Okay.
and explore how our bodies and our engagement with our surroundings really are central to how we learn even those very, very abstract ideas.
So to help us really get a grip on this, we're actually going to start by looking at how we learn physical skills, like playing a sport, you know?
Yeah.
At first, it might seem like comparing apples and oranges, learning to shoot a basketball versus understanding quadratic equations.
Right.
But trust us, seeing how REC works in something really tangible, like mastering a golf swing, could totally change how you think about learning everything else, including those STEM subjects that, sometimes feel like they're written in a foreign language.
Yeah, absolutely.
So get ready for some potential aha moments
Oh, yeah.
that just might change how you see learning altogether.
So to really understand this shift, we need to start by looking at that traditional understanding of learning.
Okay.
This view, which is often called cognitivism, really emphasizes what's already going on in our heads.
Okay.
The basic idea is that when we encounter something new, we're essentially forming guesses or hypotheses in our minds, and those are based on mental models or frameworks that we've already built up.
Okay, so let's kind of unpack that a little bit. So if I'm trying to understand a new physics concept, the traditional view would say I'm using existing knowledge, maybe about forces or motion, to try to make sense of this new information, like connecting new pieces to a puzzle that I've already started.
Exactly. And a prominent argument in support of this idea is that truly learning a new concept might not even be possible without having some pre-existing way to think about it.
Okay.
The philosopher Jerry Fodor famously argued that even to hypothesize about a new idea, you would need some underlying framework to represent that idea in the first place.
Okay, so it's like to understand what gravity is,
Yeah.
Fodor might say you need to already have some basic mental tools
Right.
that allow you to even begin to grasp what a force acting at a distance is.
Exactly.
Otherwise, where does that initial inkling even come from?
Yeah, where does that come from? And so it suggests that we have to have some inherent built-in capacity to represent things mentally,
Yeah.
to even begin learning. But REC, this radically enactive embodied cognition view, offers a very different perspective.
Okay, so REC is suggesting that we can actually learn and understand things without needing these pre-made mental blueprints.
That's exactly it.
That sounds pretty radical.
It is radical. It's a direct challenge to this idea that we always rely on these mental representations.
Okay.
So REC proposes that cognition can occur through this dynamic interplay without necessarily needing those content or concepts the way we usually think of them.
Okay.
So the focus shifts from what's going on inside our heads in isolation
Okay.
to how we as organisms with bodies actively engage and interact with the world around us.
Okay, so instead of my brain needing a mental image of, say, a chemical bond first, REC would argue that my understanding of the chemical bond comes from my physical interactions
Exactly.
with like models of atoms or even from the gestures I use when I'm talking about them.
Exactly. You got it. And REC emphasizes that we're interacting with the world.
Okay.
and its specific characteristics long before we can necessarily put those into neat little mental categories
Right.
or form explicit thoughts about them.
Okay.
So that doing the interacting comes first.
Okay.
And understanding kind of grows out of that process.
So we're shifting from the brain as a solitary information processor to the brain as part of a larger
Yes.
system that includes our body and the world around us.
Exactly. A much more dynamic system.
And this is where it gets really interesting. How does this perspective apply to how we learn?
Mm-hmm.
Especially when we think about moving from something physical like playing tennis
Mm-hmm.
to something abstract like calculus.
Right. That's the million-dollar question. I
Yeah.
mean, REC has been very successful at explaining how we acquire skills in sports.
Okay.
So think about how athletes train.
Okay.
They don't just sit there and memorize rules
Right.
or try and create this perfect mental picture of a movement, right?
Right.
Instead, their training involves these very carefully structured ways of interacting with their environment.
So like in basketball, a coach might lower the hoop. For
Exactly.
younger players, or in baseball, they might shorten the distance between the bases.
Yeah, and it's all about creating specific conditions that allow them to learn by doing and adapting rather than just by being told, this is the correct way to move your body.
Yeah. All right. So instead of a golf instructor breaking down a swing into a list of, keep your eye on the ball, rotate your hips this way, they would focus on like where the ball lies, the slope of the green, the wind direction, and encourage the golfer to naturally adjust their swing based on those elements.
Exactly. And so these carefully designed learning environments align perfectly with REC's idea that learners are dynamic systems.
Okay.
They are fine-tuning their actions based on what their environment allows them to do,
Okay.
right? And the focus is on tweaking specific aspects of the body,
Go ahead.
the environment, and the task itself, rather than on these explicit step-by-step instructions.
Okay. So it's about setting up the right conditions
Exactly.
and letting the learning emerge from that.
You got it.
Okay. But this is often where I think people get a bit skeptical.
Yeah.
While this approach makes sense for physical skills, a lot of people doubt that it can explain how we learn in areas like mathematics.
Yeah.
It just feels different. Math seems to be all about abstract concepts and rules, things that exist in our minds. Not in the physical world like a basketball.
Exactly. And that's a really important point. And this skepticism is often tied to what are called nativist views,
Okay.
which suggests that we might be born with some fundamental concepts hardwired into our brains.
Okay.
And that might even include things like numbers.
Okay.
So there are studies that show that even very young infants seem to have this basic understanding of quantity. And some researchers point to this as evidence for these innate capacities. So this suggests that we might have this inborn foundation for mathematical thinking.
So if we have this inherent number sense, doesn't that support the traditional view that learning math is about building on these pre-existing mental concepts through explicit instruction rather than through physical interaction?
It definitely seems to point in that direction.
Yeah.
If you believe that infants already have a grasp of number,
Yeah.
then it's logical to think that math education should focus on explicitly developing that implicit knowledge through lessons, learning to count, then add, multiply, and so on.
Right.
And this assumes that there's this direct link between the external symbols of mathematics, like numerals and plus signs, and these internal pre-existing mechanisms.
Okay, I see the tension here. So traditional cognitism,
Yeah.
potentially backed up by this idea of innate knowledge, sees math learning as building on internal mental representations.
Right.
But REC, which seems to work well for explaining physical skills, needs to show how it can also account for our ability to grasp these abstract mathematical concepts.
Absolutely.
So what's the argument for math actually being an embodied practice?
Well, despite its abstract reputation, there's growing evidence that math is actually deeply intertwined with our embodied experiences.
Okay.
So think about how adults who are fluent in mathematics interact with mathematical symbols.
Yeah.
Research has shown that we often perceive those symbols, even just written digits or algebraic expressions, as if they were tangible objects that we can manipulate in physical space.
That's a really cool idea.
Yeah.
So when I see the equation 2 + 2 = 4, my brain isn't just processing abstract symbols, it's almost seeing them as physical entities that I can combine.
That's exactly the suggestion, and studies using various techniques have indicated that this might be our fundamental way of thinking.
Wow.
We experience mathematical symbols not as mere representations, but as actual, almost physical features of our environment.
Okay.
And this isn't just a superficial observation. Developmental studies suggest that our very ability to recognize and use symbols is rooted in our physical interactions with objects in the world.
Okay, so like a toddler learning what the drawing of a dog represents, might first physically interact with the dog,
Exactly.
petting it, hearing it bark.
Right.
And that experience helps them to understand the abstract symbol.
Precisely. And this connection continues as children move through their math education.
Okay.
Analyses of classroom interactions show that even when children are using mathematical symbols, they're often grounding those symbols in their pre-symbolic multisensory understandings.
So like a child might use their fingers to represent two groups of objects coming together before they fully understand the plus sign.
Exactly.
That's representing that same action.
You got the physical action and the intuitive grasp comes first, and then that symbol becomes a way to represent that existing understanding.
That makes a lot of sense.
And this isn't limited to early math research at higher levels, suggests that our ability to work with and master notation, even complex symbolic operations, relies on us treating these symbols as if they were tangible things.
Okay.
We develop the sensitivity to the practices of math, learning how to interpret orientations, patterns, and quantitative relationships within diagrams and symbols in ways that align with the conventions of the field.
It's like we're being enculturated into the culture of mathematics, learning to see these static representations as opportunities for action,
That's a great way to put it.
even if that action is mostly mental.
And math instruction can be seen in part as guiding students to develop these conventional ways of seeing and interacting with these representations.
So there's a difference then between our physical interaction with, say, a basketball and our interaction with a mathematical symbol on a page.
Exactly. Our engagement with that symbol often requires what's been called elaborate mental construction,
Yeah.
a kind of internal work to bridge the gap.
Okay.
So, for example, when you look at a complex algebraic equation, you're not physically manipulating it in the same way that you might rearrange blocks,
Right.
but you are mentally moving terms around, substituting values, and applying rules based on your understanding of how those symbols relate to each other.
Okay, so I can physically dribble a basketball, but my interaction with an equation on a whiteboard is different.
Right.
It's more about internal manipulation and visualization.
Exactly. And visualizing and mentally manipulating these displays in fields like math can be seen as a more abstract form of that direct physical engagement we have in sports.
Yeah.
We can't physically enact the interactions in the same direct way.
Okay.
Think of a ladder versus a Cartesian grid. Both have these horizontal lines, but only on the ladder can you physically climb up and experience that vertical movement.
Right.
With the grid, you have to imagine that movement.
Yeah, that's a really helpful analogy.
I'm glad.
So with math, we're almost building a mental ladder to interact with these symbols.
Yeah, in a sense, yes.
Yeah.
But these constraints on direct physical interaction are what have allowed for these very sophisticated symbolic systems and ways of reasoning that are so crucial to math.
Okay.
And this is why studying math as embodied is so valuable. It can help us understand how meaning is given to symbols and how physical experiences shape our understanding.
So how can what we've learned about teaching physical skills in sports inform how we teach abstract concepts in math?
That's a great question. Researchers in math education can learn a lot from how sports instructors use imagery and guided practice to promote skill development.
Okay.
For example, they might encourage students to relate a less familiar situation to a more familiar one. Through mental imagery, and while there's already research on using metaphors in math education, the enactive perspective provides a new way to understand how those metaphors work and how they're grounded in our experiences.
Okay, so instead of just thinking of math as a set of abstract rules, we can leverage our embodied experiences and familiar physical actions as a kind of metaphorical foundation to make sense of those rules.
Yes, but from the REC perspective, that term visualization might be a bit limiting.
Okay.
Because it can imply a passive, purely visual process.
Okay.
Whereas math, like many other practices, is a proactive, multisensory interaction.
Okay.
We're not just passively seeing symbols.
Right.
We're engaging with them using our bodies and senses.
Okay.
Even if those actions are sometimes internal and subtle.
So it's not just about seeing a graph. It's about almost being the graph.
Exactly.
Feeling that change in slope as if you're walking up a hill.
You got it. And recognizing the similarity between how we learn in overtly embodied domains like sports and covertly embodied ones like mathematics can lead to better learning environments for math.
That's a really interesting idea.
Yeah, if human learning shares these fundamental principles, then we can apply some of those successful instructional methods from sports to math.
It really brings home the point that you can't just pour knowledge into someone's head.
Absolutely.
You have to create the right conditions for them to build that understanding themselves.
Exactly. In sports, it's now widely recognized that athletes develop more robust skills
Mm-hmm.
through active engagement
Okay.
and exploration
Okay.
rather than by just passively following instructions.
Right.
This idea of constraints-led pedagogy suggests that instead of telling students exactly what to do,
Okay.
teachers should design tasks and structure the environment in a way that guides the students' exploration
Okay.
by carefully adjusting the constraints of the situation.
So it's about setting up the right parameters.
Exactly. And this fosters opportunities for them to construct their own solutions.
Okay, so we've established that math might be more connected to our bodies and our interaction with the world than we initially thought.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned this concept of attentional anchors.
Yeah.
What exactly are those, and why are they so important for learning?
Well, an attentional anchor is basically that key point of focus
Okay.
in your interaction with the environment as you become more skilled.
Okay.
It's a specific object,
Okay.
a particular area, or even an imagined aspect
Okay.
of a situation that helps you coordinate your actions more effectively.
So like a mental sticky note.
Yeah.
Like a key element that I keep my eye on that helps me navigate the task.
You got it. Attentional anchors help to simplify the inherent complexity of a lot of tasks,
Yep.
making something that might feel overwhelming much more manageable.
Okay.
And by focusing on these anchors, you actually uncover new possibilities for action,
Okay.
what we call affordances
Okay.
in the environment.
Can you give me a concrete example of an attentional anchor in action, maybe going back to that sports analogy?
Sure. Consider a basketball player learning to shoot free throws. Research has shown that they perform better
Okay.
when they focus on a specific point on the back of the rim,
Okay.
an external focus rather than on the internal mechanics of their shooting motion.
So instead of getting caught up in the details of their technique,
Right.
they're focusing on the result they want to achieve.
Exactly. And this idea of attentional anchors fits really well with what are known as dynamical systems theory models of motor action.
Okay.
These models view skilled movement not as this centrally controlled program dictated by the brain, but as these patterns that emerge
Okay.
from our continuous interaction with the environment.
Right.
Attentional anchors act as a way to reduce the number of things we need to consciously control,
Okay.
allowing for these more fluid and adaptable movements to emerge.
And you mentioned a rodent leaping across a small stream
Yes.
as another example earlier.
Yes.
How does an attentional anchor play out there?
So before taking the leap, the rodent will often do these looming actions, kind of moving its head and body back and forth to visually assess the distance and effort required.
Okay.
And those subtle shifts in its visual perspective, the dynamic visual information it gathers, become the attentional anchors that help it to calibrate its jump.
So it's focusing on those external cues
Exactly.
to fine-tune its actions.
You got it.
So attentional anchors are about strategically focusing on key aspects of the environment to guide our actions
Right.
and facilitate skill development.
Mhm.
How does this connect back to REC and that learning paradox we discussed?
Right. So the idea that you need to know something to learn it.
Yeah.
Well, attentional anchors are really important to the REC perspective because they emphasize learning through embodied and situated activity.
Okay.
And this bypasses the need for these fully formed mental representations that traditional cognitive science suggests.
Okay.
So with attentional anchors, this learning paradox starts to dissolve.
Okay.
Learning becomes a process of developing this more refined responsiveness
Right.
to these relevant attentional anchors
Good idea.
within what's been called a field of promoted action.
Okay.
And by becoming more attuned to those cues, learners develop more effective ways of engaging with the world
Okay.
and achieving their goals.
So as educators, we can facilitate learning not by directly transmitting knowledge, but by designing environments that provide opportunities for students to discover these attentional anchors.
Exactly. Instead of telling them what the crucial attentional anchor should be, the teacher can design experiences that guide students to naturally gravitate towards and discover those anchors themselves.
Okay.
But to really validate REC's claims about the role of attentional anchors,
Yeah.
we need ways to measure them, to see them in action as someone is learning.
Right, to see them in real time.
Exactly. And that's where technology is proving incredibly valuable.
So how are researchers actually able to see these attentional anchors in action?
Well, this is where cutting-edge research using eye tracking technology,
Cool.
what are called natural user interfaces, or NUIs, like touch screens, and sophisticated data analysis techniques known as multimodal learning analytics, or MMLA,
MMLA.
comes into play. These tools allow us to really investigate that moment-by-moment creation and deployment
Wow.
of attentional anchors as someone is learning.
That's amazing.
Yeah. For example, by tracking a student's eye movements as they're working, we get a picture of exactly where their visual attention is focused.
That's incredible. So we can see what they're paying attention to, where their focus is anchored.
In many situations, yes. And one really insightful project has involved developing and studying a learning tool called the Mathematical Imagery Trainer for Proportion, or MITP.
MITP.
Yes,
Yeah.
and this is an experimental setup that provides a context for studying how those attentional anchors develop
Right.
when someone is learning about proportional relationships.
Okay, tell me more about this MITP. How does it work?
So students using MITP, they interact with a large touch screen, and their task is simple: to manipulate two cursors on the screen using their hands
Okay.
in a way that makes the whole screen turn green. The screen only turns green when the vertical positions of those two cursors maintain a specific proportional relationship, say a 1-to-2 ratio,
Okay.
and the activity is structured in stages, gradually introducing different visual cues on the screen.
Okay.
Starting with just the two cursors on a blank background, then a grid is added.
Yeah.
And eventually, numerical values are displayed next to the cursors.
So in those initial stages, they're just using their hands without any numbers or symbols to figure out how to make the screen green.
Exactly. This initial phase is designed to let them develop that intuitive, embodied understanding
Okay.
through their physical actions before they start trying to apply any symbolic representations.
Okay.
It's particularly interesting because a lot of students, when they first encounter proportion problems,
Mm-hmm.
they tend to think about them additively rather than multiplicatively.
Okay.
So for example, if two quantities are in a 6-to-10 ratio and one changes to 9, an increase of 3,
Okay.
they might incorrectly assume the other should become 13, also adding 3, instead of the correct answer of 15 multiplying by 1.5.
Okay.
So MITP is designed to help them move away from that additive thinking
Okay.
towards a more multiplicative understanding
I see.
through that interaction.
Okay.
The learning process has two main steps.
Okay.
First, to allow them to develop those patterns of hand movement,
Okay.
the feeling of moving their hands in a coordinated way to maintain that proportion.
Okay.
And then in later stages, to help them connect those actions
Mm-hmm.
to the formal mathematical descriptions.
Okay.
Researchers have used these detailed methods like collaborative ethnographic microanalysis to study how students interact with MITP and how their understanding evolved.
Wow, that's really in-depth. And what have they observed?
So initially, students often explore the screen by moving the controls around pretty freely, almost randomly,
Okay.
but they start to notice this relationship between the positions of their two hands.
Okay.
And many will say things like, my hands have to be a certain distance apart or
Okay.
move together in a certain way to keep that screen green.
Interesting.
At first, they might try to keep a fixed distance between their hands as they
Okay.
move them up and down,
Okay.
but they often discover that the higher you go,
Yeah.
the bigger the distance between your hands needs to be
To maintain that green.
to maintain that green. Exactly. And what's revealing from the REC perspective is that this spatial interval, the empty space between their hands, often emerges as a spontaneous, self-imposed constraint,
Okay.
an attentional anchor.
Interesting.
It's not something that's explicitly taught.
Wow.
It arises naturally from their interaction with the task.
So the empty space between their hands actually becomes the main thing they're paying attention to
Exactly.
to solve the problem.
It transforms into a thing
Wow.
that they can monitor and manipulate.
That's fascinating.
And they progress from thinking the interval needs to be a constant size to realizing that its size must change
Okay.
in relation to the elevation of their hands. It becomes a way to simplify the task, collapsing those two motor actions into a single focus controlling the spatial relationship between them.
So has this MITP approach been effective?
Yeah, the results have been encouraging. Controlled studies have shown that students who engage with MITP
Okay.
or even just observe others using it demonstrate a better understanding of proportion compared to control groups who receive more traditional instruction.
That's great. And you mentioned eye tracking research as well. What has that shown?
Right, so the research in collaboration with the University of Utrecht combined video recordings of the students,
Okay.
logs of their touchscreen inputs,
Go.
and eye tracking data.
Okay.
And this rich data analyzed through that lens of REC and attentional anchors
Mm-hmm.
provides some fascinating insights.
Okay.
One finding is that students often form those attentional anchors, visual points, or areas on the screen
Okay.
that are crucial for coordinating their movements.
So you can literally see where their eyes are focused.
Yes, and how that focus is correlated with their hand movements and their success.
That's so cool.
It is, and the researchers produce these visualizations showing where students were looking before and after they figured out how to keep the screen green.
Okay.
And what's interesting is that they often focus on these seemingly informationless spots,
Okay.
not on the cursors or the grid lines, but in the space between the cursors,
Okay.
or at a particular height relative to one of the cursors.
Wow.
This hovering gaze appears to be crucial.
So they're not looking at the most obvious cues,
Right.
but at these more subtle, almost invisible points.
Exactly. And the eye tracking data revealed this time lag
Okay.
between when they achieved the correct coordination
Yeah.
and when they could actually articulate what they were doing.
Interesting.
So we could see that coordination in their hands and eyes before they could even explain it.
So learning is happening on this implicit level
Yeah,
before we fully grasp it intellectually.
exactly. And it suggests that using NUIs like touchscreens and MMLA can give us whole new ways of understanding learning.
That's amazing.
It's a shift in focus to action and interaction as the foundation of learning.
So a big takeaway is that learning, even of these abstract math concepts,
Yeah.
might actually be rooted in our interactions with the world and the development of these attentional anchors.
Exactly. It's not just manipulating symbols in our heads.
REC suggests that to understand learning, we need to pay attention to the role of our bodies and our engagement with the environment.
Absolutely.
It makes you think about other areas where we develop expertise, like a musician learning a new piece or a craftsperson honing their technique. Maybe they develop similar attentional anchors through practice. These points of focus that lead to mastery without them even realizing it.
It's fascinating to think about.
Could consciously identifying those anchors be a key to understanding?
It's a great question and one worth exploring.
For those who are intrigued, we encourage you to look into embodied cognition and enactivism.
Yeah, there's so much to learn.
It feels like we've just scratched the surface of a new way of thinking about how we learn. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
Yeah, this was great.
Until our next exploration, keep those minds and bodies actively engaged.
Absolutely.
Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you.